This is the news segment of the Unexplained from TalkRadio. My name is Howard Hughes.
Online, on DAB, and on the TalkRadio app. Talk Radio.
And talking about ghosts and apparitions, let's cross to Japan now. Long-term listener and Japan reporter in Kyoto, Phillip Jackson is here to talk to us about the Japanese Prime Minister's residence, which is said to be, number one, very haunted, and number two, back in the news again. Phillip, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Howard. Good evening. Good morning.
So what's the story then? The Japanese Prime Minister's residence is said historically to be haunted, and it's back in the news now after an earthquake in February. By the way, you had an earthquake, didn't you, just a few days ago? Is everything okay?
Yeah, we had a big one in February, and that was in the Tohoku region, where the big earthquake was in 2011. And then we had another one just last week in exactly the same region. There was a tsunami warning after the recent one, but fortunately that didn't come to anything. But that's one of the reasons why this story came back up, because the Prime Minister, basically, there hasn't been a Prime Minister living in the Prime Minister's official residence since 2012. And when we had the recent earthquake, then the Prime Minister got grilled. It took him 20 minutes to get to his residence. He should be living there in case an emergency such as this happens. And whenever this happens, the stories of the ghosts in the residence always comes up. And in one previous Prime Minister, this goes back to the year 2000, Prime Minister Yoshida Mori, he's said to have told a friend that he was woken one night by the sound of marching soldiers. And there's actually a number of reports of military-clad figures being seen in a nearby garden. During the 90s, the wife of another past Prime Minister, Prime Minister Hatta, his wife wrote in her memoirs that she'd felt chills running through the house, that the atmosphere was very odd. And apparently she invited an acquaintance to cleanse the premises. And that acquaintance apparently told her that the place was teeming with ghosts. And another of the prime ministers, probably the most famous sort of modern time prime minister from Japan, Koizumi, he was living there from 2001 to 2006, and it's reported that he actually brought in a Shinto priest to perform some form of sort of ceremonial exorcism on the place. What the results of that were, I don't really know.
So the site, what had the site been? Did you say it was some kind of military installation in the past?
Well, what had happened, it always comes up when they talk about this situation, they always say, well, what's the sources? If there is paranormal activity, if there is something unexplained there, what are the sources? And it always goes back to the 1930s. And this basically involves the assassination of a prime minister, secret societies, factions within the military, and also a plan to assassinate Charlie Chaplin.
Really?
With regard to the assassination, the first assassination was Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi in 1932. And basically, Prime Minister Inukai, he was shot by 11 naval officers in an attempted military coup. And what had happened was that there was growing militarism in Japan at the time. You've got to remember that the country wasn't run by a citizen government that only started in the late 1800s.
So there was always the possibility of a military coup. Yeah.
And so Charlie Chaplin was in Japan. He'd arrived in Japan on May the 14th to promote his latest movie. And he was going to do a tour of the country. And he'd been invited to a reception with the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister at that time, I would say there was military factions, economic downturn. The military was saying that by rebuilding the military, that would bring more jobs, but the government didn't want to go down that road. So it was a kind of divided country, but the military had a lot of power. So they decided they were going to dispose of the Prime Minister, and they were agitating to basically start a conflict with the US at the time. So those things were already starting to come up. And they thought that if they assassinate Charlie Chaplin, that would
be a catalyst.
Get a response from the Earth, yeah.
Right.
What they didn't realise was they thought Charlie Chaplin was American. They didn't realise he was English. But they decided they would...
But adopted Hollywood star.
Yeah. So they thought they'd kill two birds with one stone, assassinate the Prime Minister and Charlie Chaplin at the reception.
Okay, so the basic story, Philip, is that it's thought that these events play themselves out in this building. This is the news segment of The Unexplained from Talk Radio. My name is Howard Hughes.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.